Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. This is episode number 69. Joining me today, as usual, I've got Rohan. How's it going?
Good.
And all the way from the UK this morning, we have Adrian. Hey, Adrian.
Hi there, how are you?
Good, thank you.
This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabu. Casa. Easily and securely access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that also supports the Home Assistant project. The configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML.
So, whereabouts in the UK are you, Adrian? No, it's a big place over there.
Yeah, no, I'm west of London, so I live in a town called Maidenhead, which is reasonably close to where I work, so not much of a commute.
Nice. All right. Well, we'll break down everything with you in a minute, but first, Rohan, new release, and it's actually a mixed bag, this release. There's a whole bunch of new features, a whole bunch of breaking changes, but I think the biggest change this release has to do with the new database, which has come in for Home Assistant. So when you upgrade to 0.112, for the first time, Home Assistant is going to do a massive update to the database backend. So this might be MySQL if you're using a MySQL database, or the SQLite database. It's essentially what stores all the history Home Assistant uses for the logbook and the activity history. So when you turn off and on lights. And yeah, the update is based to do around speed. So once this update is done, it'll basically re-index everything, make everything a little bit snappier. It might take a few minutes when you first boot into 0.112 because the Home Assistant database is going to reformat itself and put it back into its proper order. If you have a huge database, we're talking like gigabytes, maybe 30 gig or something, it might take a few hours. So don't think Home Assistant, the updates failed for whatever reason. Just be patient. But usually if you've got some good hardware and you've got a small database, small history, maybe you've kept your recorder settings to just 24 hours or something, it should only take, maybe a couple of minutes for the update to take effect.
Yeah, that's great. But also along with that, the logbook and history kind of related also have a date and time range picker now. So it doesn't show a full day's worth of data by default. It just shows a couple of hours. And then you can kind of filter almost by what you need.
That is something has been really frustrating me for quite some time, is when I would go in and go, what triggered that, blind to open all of a sudden? I go into the history and it takes, 1 to 2 minutes for it to load the whole 24-hour history. Only loading a couple of hours, that'll make it much faster. And also like the ability to filter down by time. So that's really cool. Because I thought previously you could only do a whole day, which sometimes didn't make sense.
No, and it's kind of annoying, right? Which is, if I know that something happened between here and here, then why am I sitting there scrolling through whatever, trying to find whatever?
Exactly.
This makes a lot more sense to me, being able to filter. And
along with that, you can now see who turned or changed an entity state. So who turned a light on and off if you're using Home Assistant users. So if you have multiple users in your house and they're all logged in on their phones, you can now tell who turned off and on an entity. So that's pretty cool to see those sort of features that have been in a while starting to finally filter out into the UI, I think.
Yeah, and which is also kind of nice because, again, if you have kids and the kids are like, no, I didn't do this, I didn't turn this off. Actually, yeah, you did. So which is nice. I don't know how that would work with, again, like an Amazon Echo and stuff like that. I'm guessing that'll just show up as like a system, turn it on or off or something like that.
Yeah.
But, or whose ever account that's logged into, maybe. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's a good step forward, right? So also, multiple entities and states are now in YAML. So if you love your YAML automations, you can actually put in a list of entity IDs or the states in when it comes to the conditions. So that's handy.
This is awesome, especially because, I love the YAML for automations. Being a developer, I just love programming, in text. And this is going to clean up a whole bunch of YAML. I have a whole bunch of and conditions, like this input boolean needs to be off, this one needs to be off, this binary sensor needs to be off. Being able to put them into just that one block as a list
just makes it a lot cleaner.
So much space. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And an interesting one, which I thought was hopefully will help me around the house. The Home Assistant UI now disconnects after 5 minutes of inactivity. So if you've got Home Assistant loaded up in a browser window, it's constantly polling with WebSockets to get, like sensor data. Basically, if you're looking at the Home Assistant dashboard, it should be live updating.
Yeah.
Now, if you're on a phone and you have your browser left open in the background, Home Assistant can actually keep that connection open, and it'll just end up draining your battery in the background because you're not looking at it. So now, if you haven't touched or you haven't used the Home Assistant window, after 5 minutes, it'll close off that connection to Home Assistant, which should basically save some battery power, especially for mobile devices. I'll be interested to see how this goes for dashboards around people's homes if they're using Lovelace for a dashboard. All of a sudden, you may have to go up and touch a tablet on the wall for it to get the latest updates for a sensor. So that'll be interesting to see. But yeah,
or even I don't know how that affects the phone from a push perspective, right? So again, like I use the Home Assistant iOS app. So does that disconnect? Does that not? Because again, that's some variant of the UI, right? So
True. I think maybe HTML5 notifications may be affected, but I'm guessing that the instance pushes it, right? Or the Home Assistant instance is pushing out a notification, whereas this is just a WebSocket that's constantly polling for information to come through. So
I hope that's the case.
Push notifications should be fine.
Yeah. I think to your point, Phil, though, I think the biggest piece is going to be for those that use tablets or anything like that on the wall, or on their walls. And, how does this affect that, right? Because a lot of folks I know would just use a browser. Maybe, again, it might be an ancient tablet, something like that, you don't have the App Store, whatever reason, right? Or you just like the simplicity of having the browser and not having to install a new app. So, and I wonder down the road if that's going to be customizable or what. So
yeah, maybe they can make it a config option, disconnect after 30 minutes or something, or disconnect after through these times, like
exactly
at night or something.
Exactly. So, I'm interested to see how this works out. So to see what happens there. Also, so now there's a notify events notification service. So essentially what that is it's a service that can send notifications to users across different platforms. So again, examples, Viber, Discord, SMS, or even phone calls. Again, depends on whatever you choose on there. So notify events is now supported as a service, which is kind of neat.
Pretty cool. It's like a little aggregator, so you can just set up that service, and then depending on, I think it's aimed at developers. Like I saw there was a lot of, like tooling, like Jenkins, Travis, those sort of things were all as services that are integrated there. And now, of course, Home Assistant is on that list. So cool to see stuff there.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what that's like, because I know some things like SMS, for example, that there's a gateway that they need to host, and there might be a cost to that and stuff like that.
Yeah, I looked into it because I was intrigued, right? Like I'd love to have phone calls, that don't cost a bomb down here in Australia as notifications for critical alerts. But I think there is the rates start, I think it's 30 cents for a phone call, and it's like 2.5 cents for an SMS, something like that.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm just looking at the Canada prices, and it's about 1.7 cents for a call, and about 0.9 cents, 0.98, so almost a cent for an SMS.
Yeah,
which is neat.
That's reasonable.
And they have a basic plan that's free, something like that, community support. So I don't know, might be something I look into down the road too, to see what I can get from there. So. I am pretty happy with the iOS app though, so let's see.
Yeah. Some noteworthy updates in this release. The remote Python debugger. So this is one Frank has introduced. So if you're a Visual Studio Code user, you can now use the remote Python debugger to connect to the running Home Assistant instance to test maybe some changes you want to test out, make sure it doesn't break your config, or if you want to debug something that's going on. Now, Rohan, I mentioned, I think it was on the last episode, that I've been having some issues with Home Assistant struggling with memory and all that recently. I've actually found a cool little tool. It's called PySpy, and I'll leave a link in the show notes. But essentially what I needed to be able to find out what Home Assistant was doing. So every morning I would wake up, 8 a.m, I would walk into the kitchen, which would kick off my morning routine. The blinds would open, and then Home Assistant would just stall. It would run out of memory. It would use 100% CPU on my host, and like lights wouldn't turn on. It would take 2 to 5 minutes for Home Assistant to eventually finish what it was doing and come back. So I installed PySpy and actually worked out that there was the MQTT was causing, because I was able to profile Home Assistant and what Home Assistant was doing through Docker. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
So connected through to the Docker instance into the Docker container and gave me a list of what Home Assistant was doing, basically like a top command. And the top thing that was using the CPU at that time was the MQTT, and it was polling MQTT. So what I worked out was, as I walk into the kitchen, my blinds open, and the blinds have a battery reporting. And as the blinds are going up, it's draining battery. So it's constantly, the battery percentage is changing. And so every, second or two, it's pumping out, a change to the battery status. And so Home Assistant is getting, slammed with this notification that the battery state is changing, and it was causing Home Assistant, for whatever reason, Home Assistant in MQTT, just if the sensor updates too frequently, I read on the forums that it can cause 100% CPU use.
Yeah.
So I made some changes to the integration that I was using for that, and sure enough, that stopped. So that was cool. And then it happened again, and I did the top command again with PySpy, and it turned out that Home Assistant was then getting stuck doing a whole bunch of templates, and that came down to I was using Nathan's Soft UI for all my Lovelace cards, and every one of those has a template for the markdown. So I think I reached a limit in Lovelace that I had too many cards doing templates for my hardware. That was just getting too much. But I think these tools will be great for everyone to be able to for people to find out what is using resources in Home Assistant, where they can try and make things a little bit faster, and also for developers so that they can work out what integrations are taking time, right? Like, why is it could be, my Philips Hue bulbs aren't working. Well, it's because, you've got this integration over here that's causing this to go on at the moment.
Yeah. And I know in the professional world, there are a lot of solutions like this that do application performance monitoring, but it's cool to see something like this that, you can kind of use to benchmark almost your
exactly.
I guess it's more for Python programs in general, but that is pretty handy. Some other noteworthy updates: MQTT entities now will be marked as unavailable when there's no connection to MQTT. So basically, if let's say your MQTT server dies or something like that happens, you'll get that yellow stripe that says unavailable.
That is something I've thought that should be in a while. There's been a couple of times where I've restarted my MQTT server for whatever reason, and then thought, why haven't my entities gone unavailable? So that's good.
Yeah. It's a welcome update.
Yeah. Also a good way to determine if your MQTT broker is down, I guess. If everything's gone unavailable, okay, raise an alert.
Yeah, exactly.
New services for Sonos users. So there is now the ability for the Sonos, I think there's a remove song service. So if you want to remove a song from the queue, maybe you want to remove the third song that's about to play, you can now remove it through Home Assistant. There's also a new queue position as an attribute to Sonos speakers, so you can find out how far into a playlist you are. So you might be playing the 23rd song in an album or something like that. And I believe there's also support now for the Sonos Playbase. So if you have one of those brand new Sonos Playbase speakers that that Sonos have released, then you now can control those in Home Assistant.
That's neat. Yeah. Breaking changes. So there's actually a bunch of breaking changes. So you know what? Check the release notes. I know a lot of people like us to kind of go through the top couple, but in all honesty, there's just so much right now that we don't know that we'll actually have the ability to go through all of those. So have a look at the release notes and make sure you look at that before you upgrade.
I think there's been a whole bunch of integrations moved over to the UI, so there'll be a lot of deprecations and all that. So
Yeah.
watch out for that too.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, Adrian, now is it's Q&A time with you. So, I mean, you know what? Why don't you start off? Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your Home Assistant experience and your automation experience and as a whole.
Cool. So I guess I had to try and look this up this evening because I wasn't entirely sure how long or when I started, but I figure it's about 4 years that I've been using Home Assistant. So
Nice.
I got into home automation because where I work, and I won't say where I work because they're not really involved in any of this, but they were looking to get into the home automation space, and they picked up some product and service from AT&T in the US. So AT&T have got a sort of packaged offering that they were looking to launch, and I was fortunate enough to get involved in the beta test for that. And they came along and they put some home automation kit in my house, and I started looking at it and started getting into it and thinking, this is pretty cool, this is quite interesting. And at a certain point they decided they weren't going to pursue that opportunity any further. By that point I got the bug, and I was chatting to some friends at work, and they said, oh, you should look at this Home Assistant tool. It's completely free, it runs on all sorts of platforms. And I gave it a go, and the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, nice. So, what, like 4 years ago, that would have been pretty early, maybe like 0.5 or something, maybe even earlier than that.
Yeah, I'd love to find out. I mean, I've really got no way of knowing. I was going back to old emails and trying to see, what was the earliest reference I could find. But no, I mean, it's been a great journey. It's a brilliant piece of software. I love all the things that they've done with it. I love the way they've enhanced it, and I absolutely like this idea that you've got in Home Assistant. You've got this manager of managers. That's how I describe it to people. You've got all these little bits of automation that sit around your home. You've got your Philips Hue bulbs, you've got your Sonos, you've got your Logitech Harmony. You've got all these different platforms that in themselves do great stuff, but trying to get them to work together is incredibly frustrating. And having something like Home Assistant where you can join up the various bits. So when I put the television on to watch TV as a harmony activity, I can then basically go to my Philips Hue lights and get them to do things.
Yes.
It's something that commercially nobody has got right. Nobody's got right in the commercial world, and I don't think they ever will. I don't think there'll ever be one platform that will solve all of those problems. Not in a commercial sense.
Yeah.
I think the problem now, it's becoming a sort of a race to build the ecosystem to do that, and I think it's going to end up being a bit like Netflix and the streaming wars, where all of a sudden Netflix was first to market, and now every studio is bringing out their own streaming service, and it sort of devalues what Netflix was to offer, right? Which was a single place, a single fee for people to go in and consume a whole bunch of content. And now basically, I think the joke is now that we basically need a Netflix to sort of pick and choose, or to bring all these subscription services together, right? So now we've got Apple HomeKit, we've got Google that was doing, I think, Weave, they were calling it. We've got Amazon that's doing the with their Echoes. They've got the Echo Plus that can do Zigbee integration. Everyone's trying to be the silo, and everything integrates through them.
Well, you've got Smart Things from Samsung.
Exactly. Yep.
So all of these people are trying to get into that, are trying to do that. I mean, I've taken a look at HomeKit because I'm a big Apple fan. But I mean, again, HomeKit. I must admit, HomeKit didn't particularly excite me. It didn't. It didn't have that tackiness that Home Assistant does, where everything. I mean tacky in a bad sense. I mean tacky as in a sticky sense, as it kind of glues everything together.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that, right? And a lot of it comes down to, again, having the same problem that Phil was saying, and you're saying that around just everybody's doing their own thing now, and it kind of breaks a lot of stuff, especially in the commercial world.
And then, of course, we're seeing a raft of, early adopters or early entrants into the marketplace now are kind of saying this isn't economical, we can't sustain it, and they're starting to shut down their cloud platforms.
Yeah.
The last couple of episodes I've listened to from you guys,
Yeah.
you're talking about various ecosystems going offline, and all of a sudden the technology is not viable anymore.
Yeah, totally.
You're potentially sitting on a brick that you can't use.
Yep.
Yeah, and again, a lot of people closing off APIs. It's not just hey, it's a brick. It's also now like, great, you can use it, but you can use it on our terms, not on your terms, right?
Mm-hmm. Smart Things actually came out this week and said we're removing the ability for developers to use, I think they have Go or something like that. You can actually code devices that don't exist in the Smart Things ecosystem.
Yeah.
And they came out and said we're deprecating that. They also said that, there'll be devices, maybe some switches or sensors that will eventually, that are 7 years old that may see end of life, so it's definitely a thing, right? It sucks.
Yeah, I mean, at least the nice thing about their sensors, and like I've got a few Samsung sensors, but they're all Zigbee based, right? So great. You know what? I actually moved a lot of my Samsung sensors off of the Samsung Hub. I actually have the original V1 SmartThings Hub or whatever.
Nice. Yep.
Way pre Samsung. I don't need SmartThings to the SmartThings platform to be able to utilize those anymore, right? So it's not a complete waste. It's not that I have to go out repurchase my sensors, right? And at least that's a nice thing about there being a level of openness, right? Where and it is annoying that Samsung is killing off that platform, but at least I don't have to reinvest in everything. And again, kudos to them for making that decision. And I think that was pre Samsung themselves. I think that was more Smart Things, right? But at least kudos for keeping that open, right?
No, I mean I try and do that now. I try and think about if I'm going to buy something or I'm going to invest in something, is it an ecosystem that I can move forward with? So I think one of my most recent acquisitions was I bought myself a combi stick, just so I could start doing some stuff with Zigbee home automation.
Yes.
ZHA, and I have to say I'm incredibly impressed with it. I'm using those little Xiaomi, is it Akiva?
Yeah,
Aquara, I think.
I'm looking at Aquara. I'm looking around here for the box. I can't see the box in my study. I've got the middle of the box, which I'm holding up to the camera. But very small, very tiny sensors. There's actually one on the door behind me for the guys who can see me, just so I can test it. So I when I started out, I kind of out of that work project, I was left with a bunch of Z-Wave sensors. So I was left with some Z-Wave motion, Z-Wave plugs. I was left with out of that. So I kind of, when I started, I kind of invested in Z-Wave, and I've had mixed results with Z-Wave. When it works very well.
Yes.
But on a number of occasions, my Home Assistant Z-Wave has decided to completely forget every single device, and I pretty much had to start from scratch. So I found that very frustrating. So if you trawl back through the forums, you will find sort of heated discussion between me and various other people about what on earth is going on with Z-Wave. And why does it keep forgetting stuff? So I'm currently sort of midway between sort of deciding whether I carry on with Z-Wave or whether I push completely over into Zigbee home automation. Do everything with ZHA, because I'm finding ZHA that much more reliable, that much more convenient, and so far it's very, very solid. I've got a rent, so I've got to be careful what I install. I can't do permanent installs.
Sure.
I mean, it's a very large floor plan. It's a single. We call it a bungalow. It's a single story, so it doesn't have an upstairs, but it's got a very big ground floor print, and it's always been a challenge to find technologies that will cover the whole house. So if I've got a Hue hub at one end of the house, I kind of find I have to put a Hue bulb in the middle of the house just to act as a bit of a repeater. So I thought Zigbee was going to get around that, but it didn't. But I then researched what I could do in terms of I think they call it a Zigbee router.
Yep.
So you've got like a controller, a router, and a sort of end node. And I looked at building my own router. I looked at sort of various Zigbee modules and what I could do with those. And before I went down that route, I found a couple of Zigbee smart plugs from a company called Inner, INNR. They were reasonably cheap on Amazon, and they've solved the problem brilliantly. So I've got a couple of those plugged in around the house, and they've just sort of made the whole Zigbee network on the Combi completely reliable.
Nice.
I think it also depends on the controller as well. I know I was using Zigbee to MQTT with a whole bunch of the C2530s or whatever they're called, the little USB sticks.
Yeah.
And I have a whole bunch of downlights, Zigbee downlights, and they just wouldn't communicate together. I ended up running 3 Zigbee networks because my house isn't that huge. But once again, getting from one end to the other, it was just a pain. But since moving to the Combi, all the Zigbee devices are communicating with each other and have created this super mesh, from Philips Hue to Osram to Xiaomi. So, much better.
Yeah. That's
cool.
I
haven't been brave enough to move the Hue bulbs around yet. They're still sitting on. So pretty much all my lighting I've moved to Hue. So I started out with Hue. I then added in some IKEA Tradfree.
Yep.
That's how you pronounce it. And terrible experience with the Tradfree hub. I thought it was an awful piece of technology. When it works, it works, and then it seems to, depending on firmware updates, certain firmware updates, it just completely stopped working.
Oh, wow.
It wouldn't go online. It wouldn't get a DHCP address from my router. Couldn't figure it out. So at a certain point in time, the ecosystems got suitably aligned that you could pair a Tradfree bulb with a Hue hub. So from that point, all of my IKEA bulbs are basically paired up with the Hue hub. So I've got all the lighting is on Hue.
Cool.
And kind of, I think where I go is all of my home automation tech. So the door sensors, the motion sensors, any other kind of sensors I want to put in. I think I'll put those on the Combi, and probably over time just decommission the Z-Wave, and either pass it on to somebody else or stick it on eBay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing is too, for less critical stuff, right? Like, then maybe those kind of things, if there's other spaces which, it's good to have, but you don't really need, that kind of stuff is like, okay, great. Instead of going out and spending money on more stuff, since you have the infrastructure, just stick it there and call it a day, right?
Yep.
So repurpose it that way.
So you mentioned you're in your bungalow. How many other people are in your home? Is it just yourself, or have you got other people to consider?
No, I've got my partner, and I've got a 16-year-old son.
Nice.
So a 16-year-old son is completely home automation unaware.
Yep.
He's the one. He's the one who continually goes around and turns off light switches, and we'll sit down in the living room and say, well, my partner will say, well, why haven't the lights come on, or why aren't the lights working? I'll go, well, they're probably turned off on the switch.
Yeah.
So that is one of my biggest frustrations. Is somebody needs to invent a switch cover that you can put on that kind of locks the switches on, but still gives you the ability to interface to home automation. I'd love to find something like that.
I know they do for the States, yeah.
Yeah, there is. Who is it, Phil? Is it Lutron that has that? I think it's Lutron that has that. And basically, it's like a little. It's almost like those radio knobs for the light switches, the dimmer switches. It looks like that, but it actually controls. I think it pairs with Philips Hue, and it'll actually control the light that way. Right, and kind of lock it into place. So I know it only works in certain countries, though.
Yeah, I need a UK version because the UK's got its own way of doing things, and its own size of switches, and we switch things down to go on and up to go off.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the opposite to the US. The US does it the other way around.
Yes.
But yeah, something like that. I mean, I've even thought about just rewiring the light switch so that I just basically wire the two ends of the wires together inside the switch. So
yeah, honestly,
remove the choice.
I do because I'm a renter as well. Masking tape on the switch, As soon as the fingers go to touch the switch, it's an immediate. Oh yeah, I shouldn't touch that.
Yeah.
Because there is a Hue switch in the living room, but it's not in the same place as the switch.
Yeah,
it's on the side of a bookcase. There's a switch. There's one of the portable little Hue switches you can take down. And you've just reminded me. Actually, I've got a brand new Zigbee standalone double switch sitting here that I meant to play with and I haven't done anything with yet. It's just for that purpose. So just to put over the top of light switches.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
And then I kind of run. So what do? I run pretty much everything on Docker.
Okay.
So I've got a server here, and I've really got into Docker. So I used to run lots of individual services on a variety of machines around the house. And a good few years ago, I picked up a cheap HP microserver, and I run Linux on that. And then I've got as a Docker host.
Yeah.
And then I've got a whole bunch of about 15 or 20 different Docker images that I run for various things to do that. So you were talking about the database earlier. So I've got a MySQL Docker container that just looks after Home Assistant. So they I use something called Docker Compose. So you can kind of describe your whole setup in one file. So I've got one file that describes all my Home Assistant setup. And then it basically lists all the different Docker containers, and they can all talk to one another and integrate that way. So I'm very pleased with that. That works really well, and it's really easy when it comes to update.
You're like me. You've probably got things like MQTT as a Docker image. You've probably got what else is there? I've got InfluxDB, Grafana, all running connected to Home
Absolutely,
Assistant.
You're basically describing my system. I also played a few years ago with something called Happy Bubbles. Have you heard of Happy Bubbles?
Yes. I don't think they work anymore though.
I think they still work. They still work. He doesn't. Okay. I think they became a victim of the trade war that's going on between the US and China. So I think reading between the lines of his website, it seems to be that he was importing the stuff from China and selling it on.
Yep.
And it just became too expensive with all the tariffs for him to import from China. So he's kind of given that up as a project. But I've still got a few around the house, and so I run a Happy Bubbles server inside Docker.
So they were the Bluetooth beacons that you could track
Bluetooth beacons.
things.
The idea was you could track people around. So one of the biggest challenges I have, but coming back to the social side, is my partner is very anti a lot of this stuff. So she doesn't like the idea of being tracked. She doesn't like the idea of being observed. So I'm not allowed to put any cameras in the house.
Makes sense.
There's no cameras allowed in the house. I've got a couple of cameras outside that are hooked up, but if there's the slightest suspicion of a camera anywhere in the house, it gets taken down and put back in my study. So, and then, things like presence detection, again, it doesn't go down too well. So I've got to do small steps with those kind of things, and
Sure.
And I don't want to create the impression that people in the house are being observed.
Exactly.
I think that's a fine line you've got to draw. And I love the idea that you walk into a room and everything turns on, but I think some people find that a little bit intimidating and a little bit unsettling.
Sure. And again, sometimes that happens even with, there's the people that live in your house, but there's also like guests and such, right? So it's like, and those are all important design considerations, right? Like at one point I was thinking, I should put a motion sensor in the guest bathroom. And I was like, that's why, like, that's not, that, right? It's that, you have that thought, then you got to kind of pull yourself back and being like, that, fine, it's a motion sensor. What's it going to capture? Is there motion? Is there not? Right. But it's like, for somebody that's not aware of what that actually is, it's, it can kind of be like, man, are you, what are you doing in the bathroom here? Right. Like so you're right though, right? It is a fine line, and you kind of have to deal with, okay, what does that look like? Right. Or what am I trying to get? And is there a better way of doing something?
So just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea to do it.
Absolutely.
One of the things I've learned, I think, is you sometimes got to scale back your ambition and do something that's useful and helpful.
Yeah.
So the light that turns on in the hallway when you get up and walk out of the living room, that's really, really good. Everyone likes that. Everyone gets that. Having a dashboard that says, okay, my partner is at home and I'm at home, or I'm in the office or whatever, I think that starts to freak people out. It starts to raise concerns about, well, why do you know where I am? Why are you tracking me?
Yeah.
All those reasons. I played with Raspberry Pi quite a bit over the years. Either having a sort of standalone install of Home Assistant on Raspberry Pi. I kind of don't use it in anger because I found SD card problems. I found they would run okay for a while, and then I was probably doing it wrong, but I would find SD cards would start dying and things would stop working.
Yeah. There's a lot of issues, especially with database writes and stuff like that. There's tons of issues with just the nature of SD cards, right?
So I've got a Raspberry Pi up and running at the moment and I use it to run the latest beta.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about the beta earlier, I was checking a few things while you were talking.
Yeah.
Just having a look at it, but so I keep that one on the latest beta, and I've been using it to play with the new Z-Wave integration. So they're changing I don't know how. So they're moving the Z-Wave integration out of Home Assistant into its own container, and then they're going to use MQTT to do the communication between Home Assistant and the Z-Wave stack. And the idea is you hopefully avoid some of those issues I've seen where the whole network disappears.
That was when I first started with Home Assistant. That was the problem, right? It took a while for Home Assistant to restart because the Z-Wave network had to reboot and find all the nodes. So keeping the Z-Wave on its own separate instance via there's actually Project Z-Wave to MQTT. By keeping it all there, you essentially remove the need for the Z-Wave network to restart as you're rebooting Home Assistant. Yeah. So I think I know Paulus mentioned when one of the episodes he was on with us, Rohan, that eventually one day they want to be able to see sort of components in Home Assistant with something similar, right? So instead of having to upgrade to a 0.112 to get the latest Philips Hue features, you would just upgrade the Philips Hue component inside Home Assistant. Yep. And keep Home Assistant Core as its own separate thing. So eventually that will be cool. When we get to that day, that'll be awesome to see, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a very long time away, but at the same time, you're right? Whether it's, run different things as different containers or something like that, whatever that is, right? I think, that might be some really interesting stuff, right? So.
Yeah, so I've got that sitting there. Automation-wise, I started out with YAML, but I didn't really get on with the YAML automations.
Okay.
So I kind of looked around for something else. I mean, I know they've done a lot now to make those much more approachable. There's a lot of sort of stuff you can do through the UI to set those up. But I've in the end, I've settled on Node-RED. Steep learning curve at the start, but there's a lot of good online resources out there. There's a lot of good tutorials out there around Node-RED, and I actually find it's a really intuitive environment. So I've got a bit of a background in programming and IT, and I love the idea that you've kind of got the Home Assistant sitting there as your state machine that reflects how everything is, and then when things happen in there, it fires an event out. That event goes into Node-RED, and Node-RED lets you just visually lay down what you want to happen with that event as it flows through your automations.
So, see, and this is why I love Home Assistant, because there's so many different ways to skin a cat, right? Mm-hmm. But I am complete opposite. I tried to use Node-RED for that reason. I thought, great, let's have Home Assistant as the hub that tracks all the states, and then have a different system that's doing the automations. And I looked into Node-RED, and I just found it so confusing, and maybe my programming mind just can't get around having to drag, connect nodes together, and just doing simple things like an input Boolean state, and if I'm home, do it this way, don't do it that way, sort of thing. I couldn't get my head around it, and then it's hard for people to share their Node-RED configs because it ends up all being just JSON, and it sort of gets confusing. I couldn't get my head around it, but then again, you've just said complete opposite, right? You just found once you got over the learning curve, bam, Node-RED was much easier.
Yeah, but it's a fair point about sharing. It is difficult to share stuff, and it's difficult to debug stuff. You've got to be prepared to, grab somebody else's export effectively, bring it into your system, and then play around with it till you're doing what you want. And it's definitely more of a journey than a destination, I think.
Yeah.
I think you can spend an awful long time on it. I mean, one of my, I'm just looking at some of the flows while I'm talking to you, and I mean, there's a lot of lines and a lot of boxes, linking stuff together, and it can be difficult to come back to.
And how's the debugging like? How do you find it's like what node's gone wrong when you're trying to debug something? How would you work that out?
Well, I think I find the debugging pretty good. I mean, you can, if you have these debugging nodes, and you just kind of plumb in your flow to the debugging node, and the node, when it fires, will just basically, you can get it to dump the entire message out to a debug console inside Node-RED, and you can see exactly what goes on. I think it's a really useful way to do stuff. I mean, I don't think it's for everyone, and I don't think potentially you need it for everyone needs it. But once you get into it, once you get used to it, it's very flexible, and it's very easy to work with, and the ability to use things like regular expressions or just simple pattern matching, where you can basically say, okay, anything that looks like a sensor that fires, feed it into this flow. And then within the flow, you've got access to the name of the sensor, and you can, from the name of the sensor, you can figure out what room you're in, and then you can do different things depending on what room sensor's gone off, or what type of sensor's gone off. I find that for me that works really well. What I found with the original YAML was I ended up with long lists of things, or things repeating dozens of times to get it to do what I wanted.
Yeah, I can see that too.
Yeah.
So, what is one of your favorite automations or routines you've got set up, is your go-to?
I think the one that had the absolute highest acceptance factor, if we go back to that argument, was I put a motion sensor in our garage, and so at the time my partner's son and my son were both sort of living in the house at the same time. My son now lives with his mum full time, but they just got to an age where they were sort of taking themselves to school independently. They were cycling off to school. We both work, so they were cycling themselves off to school in the morning. Sometimes after we'd left, they're sort of teenagers, and then they'd come home in the afternoon from school with their bikes, and just having the ability, the peace of mind to know, okay, in the morning, about 8:30, I would get an alert from the garage motion sensor to say somebody's in the garage, and I think, okay, yeah, they're getting the bikes out to go to school. And about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you get another trigger of the sensor to say they've come home.
Yeah, right.
That was massive peace of mind to myself and my partner. So we just kind of know, yeah, everything's okay, everything's gone all right. We weren't using it to follow up on people, but just having that peace of mind worked out really well.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's handy.
Yeah, I mean, the usual stuff like the Christmas tree lights, and the Christmas lights, that's a nice thing to do, and having an automation around that. I found something online a few months, about a year ago, maybe 6 months ago, about making your household appliances smart.
Yeah.
Using a Z-Wave power monitoring smart plug, and I really like that idea. I thought that was brilliant. Put a smart plug behind your washing machine, or behind your dryer, or behind your dishwasher, and you can basically use the power consumption on the smart plug to figure out where your washing machine is in the cycle.
So I've got a blog post on my blog about that. I've done it for my
It might be your blog that I've read. It might be your blog that I've read. There you go.
I've got the dishwasher and washing machine done, and a few people have even converted. I think there's an app daemon version, so there's a Python version out there, and there's also someone's done it in Node-RED as well. So you can download the export and put it into Node-RED as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got a Node-RED version of it sitting here. I'm just looking at it doing that. The biggest frustration I've had so far with automations has got to be motion sensors and lights. I cannot get to a point where I can get motion sensors and lights to behave the way I want them to, and I don't know why. And I've come up with multiple iterations of either Home Assistant automations or I found another amazing blog post from somebody who was. I'm just trying to look for new lighting. There it is. I've just got it up on the screen. They've actually implemented a state machine in Node-RED to do their lights. So the theory is great. The theory is that the lights are in different states depending upon the time of day and
right.
whether they were last turned on with motion or whether they were last turned on with a switch. And there's all these wonderful timers. But I will sit here in my study and I'll walk in the door and the lights will come on and I think, great, and I'll sit here and I'll be working away and I've got a motion sensor pretty much pointing at me where I sit, and then all of a sudden the lights will just turn off and I don't know why.
Oh.
So and I keep coming back to it and I keep trying to debug it and I can't for the life of me quite figure out something about the timing on the motion sensor and the timing on the lights that I haven't got right.
You have to start waving your hands and all that stuff before.
Yeah. And I want to get away from that. I'm really trying.
Yeah.
For me, that's where like the power of Home Assistant is, in that Home Assistant knows what's going on in the home. So, for example, I have the same problem, right? Like the desk I'm at right now, all the lights in my house are automated, but I have a power monitor on my PC monitor. So when I'm on the computer and the power is being drawn, Home Assistant then knows, all right, power's being sucked out of the computer's on, so don't turn the lights off if there's no motion. So that way, if I come into the room, the lights will turn on. If I leave the room and I'm not using the computer, the lights will turn off. But as soon as I start using the computer and the screen stays on, the lights will stay on too, because someone's at the computer, but they're not waving their hands, moving around too much.
Right.
So that's where I think the power of Home Assistant being able to know contextually what's going around the house based on different things. For example, my PC monitor is Z-Wave, but my motion sensors might be Zigbee. So, being able to combine the two protocols to get a state of the room, that's where it can do some really tricky stuff.
No, it's good. It's a good idea. Well, I will go back to it and I will have another go. And it's one of those ones that I'm determined to crack one day.
You could even use a ping sensor. If your computer's on and it's responding to a ping, then don't turn the lights off.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, exactly.
I have a nasty habit of leaving all my technology switched on in the study, so it's a good suggestion, but it's not for me,
Yeah.
My study is the warmest room in the house.
That's funny.
In fact, I've turned a few things off while I'm doing this recording, just because I wanted to cut down the amount of background noise.
Sure.
So are you using any voice control? Have you got an Amazon Echo or Google Home set up?
I do have voice assistants around the house. I don't have them hooked up to Home Assistant.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting. Okay.
I've looked at Nabu Casa and I've looked at pre-Nabu Casa in terms of what you can do, and it's something I need to look at. It's something I need to get into. I've done a little bit of text to speech, but I've done the text to speech inside Node-RED. So I tried using some of the examples for text to speech in Home Assistant with my Sonos setup, and I didn't get on with it. But I found a Node-RED integration called Sonos Poly TTS, and it basically ties up Amazon Poly and Sonos together. So I have actually got some stuff running with that. So when I trigger things in Home Assistant, so I've kind of set up a, going to bed message. Yep. So the idea is a single shutdown button at night to stop all the lights coming on and off in response to motion sensors and all of those things. And when I trigger that, the Sonos will actually come along and just play a sort of very Avengers style little alert chime and say good night. It's time for bed.
What's the reason behind doing that inside Node-RED and not using something like Home Assistant? Because Home Assistant has great text-to-speech with Sonos, and you can do Amazon Poly, Google text-to-speech, and you'll just call this a Home Assistant service, like tts.say, and specify the Sonos speaker. Why would you put that in Node-RED and not in Home Assistant?
I think there's probably two things. There was a bit of a learning exercise for Node-RED, and I was curious to see what I could do with Node-RED. And as I say, when I tried it in the past, I've tried Sonos TTS, and I tried a couple of things. I think I tried Poly, and I tried there's an IBM one, isn't there? And I can't remember the IBM one.
Yeah, Watson, I think it is.
I've tried Watson, and I didn't get on with the automations, and I didn't get on with those automated approaches, and then I found this sort of integration to Node-RED, and it basically did what I want, and it works very well, I have to say. And it's quite clever. I don't know who's done the development on it, but when you pass a text-to-speech string over to Poly, it's capable of caching the result. So for messages that are always the same, you don't end up calling AWS at all.
Yes,
it's cached locally on the server.
Right.
So that I think it sits in a file system cache, and all it does is just replay the same message from the cache if it's got it cached.
Interesting.
So it's quite it struck me as being quite an efficient solution as well. So rather than I'm always conscious about using other people's cloud services, and I don't want to end up running up huge bills.
Yeah.
So that certainly quite appealed. The idea that if you've done something once and you don't change it, then you never need to basically call Amazon services ever again.
No, that makes sense.
But yeah, I think I should do more with Alexa, and there you go. There's Alexa in the background just woken up.
You said her name.
Yeah.
You called. Then do some more with Alexa and Home Assistant, because I think that's a very accessible way to interact with things. So a combination of text to speech and being able to talk to something, I think works out really well. And you're not into using buttons on your phone or having to use tablets on the wall and things like that.
Yeah, and for me, it's a much more. It's exactly that, right? Like I hate having to pull out my phone, and just that kind of thing, right? So it's just an easier experience. I think I always found.
Are you the only one that drives the home automation? Like, do you have tablets on the wall to interface as well, so others can use it?
No, we use the app on the phone. So my partner has the Home Assistant for Android on her phone.
Yep.
And I managed to sort of get it to a point where she knows what buttons to go and press to do certain things. So we have a number of lighting scenes in the living room.
Yeah.
So she likes to sit and knit when we're in the living room. So I've created a knitting scheme for the lights.
Cool.
So it takes the hue lighter directly above where she sits, and the table lamp next to her are both smart lamps. Both got smart lamps in them, and it basically sets those up with nice white light that she can use to do her knitting under. So
nice.
that's gone down very well. That's another one's gone down very well. There's a knitting scheme that she can use to set the lights up so that they're good for her to knit. So I might be sitting there watching with the relax scheme on, and she can just come in and basically switch it to knitting lighting, and she's very happy with that.
Yeah. That's great.
No, I mean, I think it's as I said at the beginning, I think it's an absolutely great system. So much kudos to all the people who work on it and all the people who develop it, and extend it and add it and come up with this stuff. And the community add-on, the hacks add-on, is something I've got into recently, and all the innovation that's going on there is absolutely amazing. All the sort of not quite integrations, but or the beginnings of integrations that people are contributing to that. I keep finding all sorts of interesting little gems in there, and I think, well, that's going to go on my list of things to look at, or that Lovelace, user interface element. There's battery card that somebody's just been contributing to that I've integrated into my setup. So on one page, I can see the status of everything that's got a battery in my house, and see what state it's in, and see which ones need to be replaced and which ones are there. So I mean, it's a brilliant system, and I'm really impressed. As you can probably tell, I'm really passionate about it as well.
Yeah, I think we all are.
That's great. Nothing wrong with that.
All right. Well, Adrian, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. And
Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
No worries.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
If if you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@haspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics that we discussed today, check out our show notes on haspodcast.io.